Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and with me today is Matt Abbott, who is the Fundy BayKeeper. Welcome back to the show, Matt.
Great to be here, Jay. I always look forward to it.
It's been a couple of years since we last chatted, and the last time we were discussing the dam in St. Stephen and some of the challenges that project we're facing, and it's been a couple of years, and I think it's time for an update.
Yes. So it's been a really exciting year, a really exciting few years for the Scoodic River. Scoodic is the traditional name of the St. Croix River. It's fine to call it either as far as I'm concerned, but I just love the oldest name, the Scoodic, so I'll be using that. And, you know, I've been reflecting on it because I spent last weekend on a run with the Passamaquoddy Scoodic River Keepers, a group of Passamaquoddy citizens who've been real champions for the restoration of the river. And we do a run through Maine, but from the Passamaquoddy community near Eastport, Sapayak, all the way to Forest City to sort of mirror the route of the fish. And we do a relay run and we pass a piece of deer antler, and it's a beautiful event. And I was reflecting with some of the Passamaquoddy people I've had the pleasure of working on this restoration work, that, you know, the first time we did the run was in 2012. And you could think of it as a protest. There were at most 50,000 fish. When I talk about fish in this case, I mean alewife, river herring, gaspereau, a fish with many names. And this is a small fish about the size of herring. So similar size and biology to sardines that we eat, but instead of spawning at sea, they spawn or lay their eggs, they reproduce in rivers. So they come into our rivers every year. And we had about 50,000 in 2012, and we did this run as a protest, calling on the state of Maine to open access to the river for fish. There were fishways, but they were being blocked by the state of Maine, who didn't want the fish in the river. So we were reflecting that just 11 years ago, we were protesting, trying to get fish in the river. Now, we did the run last year. We've done it again this year. We're going to make it an annual event. And it's a celebration and a renewal of an effort. So, you know, things are going well when something that started as a protest has become a celebration. And yeah.
So I just have a couple of questions that the audience is going to want to have an answer to. First of all, why would the state of Maine not want fish in the river?
So it's really a 200-year-old history. And so about 200 years ago, during the logging days, the logging booms, we started putting a variety of different types of dams in the river. And so we started to value things other than the fish that had always sustained us. So we started to value the ability of the river to move logs downriver. Right? And then we started to value the ability of the river to produce some energy, be it to power a cotton mill, be it to produce electricity. And we also sometimes value the ability of the river to hold water with dams. For instance, even now, many of the dams on the Scoodic River exist to hold water to dilute pollution coming out of a pulp mill. Oh. And so we started to value different things than we had historically valued and always valued in a river, which was its beauty, the abundance of wildlife it produced, the food that sustained our communities. And so once we started building dams, often to support either energy generation or the historic logging industry, we blocked fish, right? And one thing is that sort of my culture of European descent, I've noticed myself and a lot of my peers, we don't always have a very long memory. And I've noticed working with the Besquetamokati or Passamaquoddy Nation is that there's thousands and tens of thousands of years of memory in this place. And so 200 years ago, we blocked fish for a whole variety of reasons. And so then fish couldn't reach the lakes that they had always spawned in. So you get to 200 years later, and finally in the 70s and 80s, we started improving fish passage, and those fish returned. But the people up in those lakes in the top of the system had no memory of them. They had never seen those fish. Their grandparents had never seen those fish. Their great-grandparents had never seen those fish. In the life of a river, in the life of an indigenous nation, in the life of a community, 200 years is not a long time, but in the life of individuals and families, it can feel like a long time.
Yeah.
So that memory of what the river provided to us had been lost, and we had started to value other things further up in the river. So there was a high value placed on the smallmouth bass fishery, and there was fear that the introduction of these large numbers of fish that aren't new fish, that in the life of the river had always been there. 200 years is not a long time in the life of a river, but those fish appeared new to the people who relied on the smallmouth bass fishery, and both because of the fear that these new fish, even though they're very old fish and native fish, the fear that they would outcompete these bass, which are an introduced species, a non-native species, or and the fact that bass started to decline as the alewife reemerged. And the bass decline was due to, we've since learned, was really about dam management. So bass lay their eggs in shallow waters, you drop the water at the dam and the eggs dry out. And that's why there weren't as many bass. But it happened at the same time that alewife appeared. So there was fear, in the state of Maine, and those bass fishing guides, through effective political lobbying and a variety of interests, convinced the state of Maine to choose bass over alewife, even though they weren't really in conflict with each other. And so from the late 80s, early 90s, until the early 2010s, we saw fish, alewife, river herring, excluded from over 99% of the spawning habitat in the river. So alewife have to get past the Milltown Dam, the Woodland Dam, which is beside the pulp mill in Baileyville on Maine, and then the Grand Falls Dam. And once they get past those three dams, that's where 99% of their spawning habitat is. That's where all the lakes are that I love to go camping and playing on with my family. And so that's why, so there was this political movement that in some ways was because of long family traditions, 200-year family traditions, but a short cultural memory of how the river really worked.
Okay.
And so in 2012, we were protesting, pushing the state of Maine. There was a really broad effort led by the Passamaquoddy-Schoodic River Keepers and the Passamaquoddy leadership to overcome this law in the state of Maine that was blocking fish. I went to Augusta in 2013 to present to a committee of legislators. Many, many others did. We packed the room. It was really powerful, and we actually achieved a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate in Maine to overcome the governor's veto. So the river has really been on a beautiful journey for the past 10 years. In 2013, we saw the fishways opened. But these are old fishways, and fish were getting past them, but it wasn't passing all the species that would traditionally exist in the river, that had existed in the river, and it's not passing as many of them as would have occurred in the Schoodic or St. Croix River historically. Now, this little fish I get so focused on is called, you can call it Gaspereau, alewife. River herring is a term for the bigger grouping of fish. They're fish that live at sea and come into rivers to spawn. They run up rivers from North Carolina to Newfoundland and Labrador. And the Schoodic, the St. Croix, right here at home for us, has always, and which forms the Canada-US border around here, would have historically been the biggest run of river herring anywhere, because it's just got the best habitat. So depending what model you use, historically there would have been 5, 10 million, even up to 80 million fish coming annually to the St. Croix River, to the Schoodic. And last year we saw 700,000. The fish are running currently, and our existing fishways can only pass 2 to 3 million at most. And this is a fish that everything eats. Right? When I'm talking, I'm a Beaver Scout leader. So when I'm talking to 5 to 7-year-olds, I talk to them about this fish as whale food. Right? It's whale food, it's also puffin food, it's also raccoon food, it's also Matt Abbott food, it can be Jay Remer food, I can hook you up if you want. And it's really a fish that feeds all. And one of the Passamaquoddy-Schoodic River Keepers, Vera Francis, the quote we have on the back of the t-shirts we wear when we're running says, what happens to the alewife happens to us, right? And this has been a fish that's been at the center of Passamaquoddy life. It's a river that's at the center of the Passamaquoddy Nation, and it's really a symbol of the abundance that brought settlers here as well, right? There's a reason non-Indigenous people wanted to be here. It's because of the abundance and diversity. And this fish in this river is really central to that. So in the past 10 years, we've seen runs go from about 50,000 to about 700,000. And we've, working with the Passamaquoddy Nation, we've got a plan for the whole river. I brought one prop because this has become sort of the Bible of fish passage restoration. It's become a model that people on other rivers are using. It's the Schoodic watershed, so the St. Croix Strategic Sea Run Fish and River Restoration Plan. And I was very fortunate to work with the Passamaquoddy Nation. We sort of looked at every dam, but not only every dam, every culvert, every bridge, every little stream that used to have trees covering the bank that no longer does, or that maybe had rocks in the middle of it. And the thing is the damage we've done to this river is much more than we can see with the naked eye or understand as lay people. Because, when we were moving logs downriver, the big rocks in the middle of the river became a problem for us. So we pushed them to the side. Well, a big rock is where you rest when you're a fish. It's shade, it's less current, so you go hang out behind that rock to rest as you work your way hard upriver, past through this strong current, up rapids and everything else. And so the restoration, yes, we're very excited that Milltown Dam is coming out. And I think of it as the restoration of Salmon Falls. Because for me, my sense of place here, it's no shade on the people who've done, who've done some really interesting engineering. Milltown Dam is one of the oldest hydroelectric facilities in North America. I know that historians talk about some of the wood and rope pulley systems that were involved in early power generation. There's lots of interesting stuff there, but my sense of place here is really tied to the river, right? And it's Salmon Falls is the rapid that's under the Milltown Dam. And so this year, fish are currently going up the fishway at Milltown Dam, as they have for quite some time. And next year they'll be going up the Salmon Falls, an unimpeded Salmon Falls, for the first time really in a couple hundred years. The Milltown Dam hasn't been there for 200 years, but we've had some sort of infrastructure in that general area for over 200 years. And for me, this is just a real celebration. And so when we look at the fish restoration, I said it's the whale food project. Everything eats this fish. We call it a keystone species because you imagine the keystone as the piece of rock that holds up an arch, right? That holds up infrastructure. So a keystone species is central to how an ecosystem functions. So I'm the Fundy BayKeeper. You introduced me as the Fundy BayKeeper. I'm doing a lot of work on one river that feeds into the Bay of Fundy, but that's because I can't go out and feed whales, but if I can help fish find their spawning grounds on the Schoodic River, then I'm feeding whales. And the other thing I say to little kids is imagine the throat size of a puffin. Puffin aren't actually that big, right? So imagine their throats. Now imagine the throat size of a humpback whale. Puffins and humpbacks both love to chow down on these fish, and every throat size in between, including ours, does really well eating this fish. And so, I'm very excited, and what's happening on the Schoodic is such a testament to how, even in these really challenging times, we can make meaningful improvements. Because where I came to this project, and where Fundy BayKeeper and the Conservation Council of New Brunswick came to this project, is we were looking at the ocean saying, what are they going to eat? The water's getting warmer. We're seeing pH changes, so ocean acidification. We're seeing real changes to the ecosystem. We're seeing a whole bunch of stress on these animals. We're seeing declines in other forage fish. So forage fish just means little fish that everything eats. So mackerel, herring, alewife, other river herring. And we're seeing declines across the board. Well, we have an opportunity to go from 50,000 fish to 5 million fish every year. And when we say 5 million fish going upriver, we mean trillions of babies coming back down, right? For everything to eat. And you can even have a throat size smaller than a puffin if you're gonna eat a baby alewife, right? And so for us, this was really, in some ways, it's restoration, but it's also how do we support this ecosystem that we're putting under a great deal of stress. The stats this year so far on ocean temperatures globally are heart-wrenching, right? The ocean is really warm, and everything in the ocean exists within a temperature range it can handle.
Right.
So everything's got a range, just like you and me, right? I think I have a constitution that was born in Scottish fog, and I notice that when I'm in the sun, right? I go from raw scallop to cooked lobster right away, right? There's no shades in between. Those are my two shades. And every species has sort of a range that it can handle in terms of temperature. And we see the impact on humans of the heat waves we've had in Europe and elsewhere, impacts on the elderly, but others. And we can think in the same terms for animals in the ocean. They're very adaptable, only so much they can handle. Well, alewife are at the middle of the range, right? They exist in North Carolina, they exist in Labrador. So they're within sort of this same species experiences warmer climates. So it's a good candidate to manage to handle the stress of climate change. And it's also food for anything that's out there. So even if we say changes in the ecosystem, even if we see some of the species that we're used to seeing here not be able to handle the temperature and new things move in, those new things are going to be plenty happy to eat alewife because they're fatty, high nutrient fish that pretty much anything in the ocean and anything on land on the sides of rivers, bears, raccoons, as well as all the seabirds, they eat them. So we really came to this both because we should do right by this river, but also because this is how we do right by the whole bay. And this region, as we've talked about before, the Western Isles, so all the waters around Grand Manan, Deer Island, Campobello, here into Passamaquoddy Bay, over to Mesas Bay, up towards Point Lepreau. We refer to this at the Conservation Council as the cafeteria of the Bay of Fundy, or the cafeteria of the Gulf of Maine. This is where you have these nutrient-rich tides rushing in from the North Atlantic and Gulf of Maine, hitting the bottom of the ocean, being forced through the narrow channels, say between, if you've ever gone over the bridge from Lubec to Campobello, it's called the Narrows for a reason. It's a narrow area of water, and just imagine the tide being forced through there. What happens when you have these, what we call mixing zones, is all the food, all the nutrients in the water will sink over time. And anything in the ocean that moves nutrients from the deep water where there's no sunlight up into the shallow water where there is sunlight, the top of the water column, that produces plant growth. There's nutrients for the plants to grow on, and once you have all those little marine plants growing, everything else can happen. There's something for the tiny animals to eat, and then the big animals eat the tiny animals. So this whole ecosystem here is really, really productive. It produces a lot of food. We call it the cafeteria for a reason. It's cafeteria for humans, but also for many animals. And this is one of the best ways to sort of restock that cafeteria.
So one question that comes to mind is with the warming of the waters. Now the water here is still mighty cold.
Yes.
But I'm wondering about what the alewife eat. Is that affected by the rise of ocean temperatures, or
it can be? I'm not as much of an expert on alewife, what they eat specifically, especially at sea. But like all forage fish, I think they eat a host of things. So they eat a lot of the little animals living in the water column, so zooplankton or zooplankton. And so that's your little shrimps, your copepods, the same sorts of things that right whales and some of the big whales and basking sharks would eat. But then I'm sure they'd be happy to munch on small fish if they go down smooth. So they eat a variety of things, and they school in large groups. And they eat at sea, and that's actually another thing they do. Like all fish, that run into rivers, live at sea and run into rivers. That's one of the ways that we bring nutrients from the ocean back into our rivers, because rivers flow down into the ocean. Nutrients, food, plant life, everything is flowing down. The fish come up, they bring some of that nutrition back. They, what's left over from their eggs and their hatching becomes nutrients. Their bodies, when they're eaten by bears and other things, or if some of them die in the river, become nutrients to feed that system again. So it really is, we think of rivers flowing to sea, but the sea comes back and feeds the river in really interesting ways too. And in the Scoodic River system, alewife is one of the key ways that has always happened.
Yeah, I was just thinking that seems to be a barometer of the health of the river.
Yes.
And when they are deprived from spawning and so forth, I would think the overall health of the river would decline.
Exactly, and these rivers are systems that have evolved over countless numbers of years, and they've evolved to have alewife in them. And the interactions are incredible. There's a freshwater mussel called an alewife floater that hatches, and the young of this mussel ride the river out. They hitch a ride on the gills of alewife, that's why they're called alewife floater, and then they get back upriver, and then as they reach the right life stage, they settle down and they filter the water. So we have a freshwater mussel that's reliant on alewife. We have the other interactions are really interesting. The Scoodic River, sadly, is a river without sea-run natural wild salmon in it anymore. But if we want to think about getting salmon back, we need the alewife first, because alewife are a food source for salmon, but they're also, alewife have always been more abundant than salmon. There's more individuals, and they provide what we call cover for salmon. So if you have 10 million alewife and thousands of salmon, or even tens of thousands of salmon, a lot more salmon, less salmon are going to get picked off by predators, because there's so many alewife to eat, right?
That's right.
And the alewife strategy is, let's have a lot of us so millions of us can get eaten and we'll still be fine, right?
Yeah.
They're a forage fish.
Yeah.
And so even to restore the next element of the system, if you're looking at salmon or shad and other fish, or even sturgeon or other things, or if we want to look at the health of our seabirds, it all comes down, that's why when we say keystone species, a lot more becomes possible when you have these species in the system.
So we have about 2 minutes left, and so I just wanted to let you know that, because if there are any key points, I will definitely have you back, because this is a great conversation to continue on with, and I think that our listeners, our viewers, are really interested in what you have
I would say, to leave with a key message, things are going well on the St. Croix. Take heart. I do. I think of this as it's sort of a hope project. I've been doing environmental advocacy here for a decade. There's a lot of stresses on the system. If there wasn't something getting better in such tangible ways that I can contribute to, I don't know how I'd feel right now, and I don't know if I'd still be doing this job. So take heart in this, and frankly, enjoy nature, right? Like, get out there. We live in a really, really special place. And get out there, enjoy it. Yes, we need to advocate for our marine ecosystems, but it all starts from a place of love and joy. I started this interview by talking about the run we do every year to welcome the fish home. That is an incredibly joyous event. I love it every year. Join us next year. Keep an eye on Conservation Council or Passamaquoddy social media. Get on email lists so you know what activities are going on. But we're putting a lot of stress on our ecosystems, but for us, and especially for our young people, we need to go and enjoy the things that are still vibrant and getting better to get that energy to continue the fight.
I think it's great, the work that you're doing and the successes that you have had, and thank you for coming on the show.
And I'll just close by saying I've been very privileged to work with the Passamaquoddy Nation on this, and we would not be where we were without just really hard work and leadership from the nation. So this is Indigenous-led conservation, and I'm so grateful to be able to contribute to it.
Well, thank you for your work, and thank you for your extending this knowledge to us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the show today, and we look forward to seeing you another day on another episode of Fundy Tidings.